I grew up with a stepmother who was controlling, manipulative, and relentless. From the moment she married my father, she dominated every aspect of our lives, turning ordinary moments into exercises of power. My father, despite his remorse and good intentions, never confronted her. By the time my younger siblings were born, I was sent to boarding school, quietly pushed aside. It wasn't malice so much as a mix of guilt and inability on his part, but the effect was the same. I became largely forgotten, sidelined by my own family. Years of distance and neglect taught me early that life rarely delivered fairness without effort, and sometimes the people closest to you could cause the deepest harm. As I grew older, I accepted that my relationship with my father would never be what I longed for. Yet I carried a quiet determination and a sharp mind, shaped by those early experiences. I eventually co-ran a private investigation firm with a close partner, focusing on infidelity and deception. We dealt with cheating spouses regularly, uncovering secrets that others desperately tried to hide. I had honed the skills of observation, analysis, and strategy, learning to notice patterns and detect lies with precision. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for the situation that appeared one morning, seemingly out of nowhere. That morning, as we prepared to leave town for a case, I received a Facebook message from an unknown number. The sender asked if I knew my stepmother. I paused, curious but cautious, and replied. Almost immediately, another message appeared. A man claiming to be a fireman explained that he had witnessed my stepmother's infidelity the night before. He had been driving down a country road, stopped to help what looked like two broken-down cars, but realized something else was happening. He took photos, traced the license plates, and tried to find the husband online. Unable to reach him, he contacted me instead. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The evidence was real. Proof of wrongdoing that had been hidden for years, evidence that could finally restore truth to my father's life, was now in my hands. I felt an intense mix of emotions: shock, relief, vindication, and anticipation. Years of resentment, of longing for fairness, surged forward in a rush. Suddenly, the chance to reclaim justice, to right past wrongs, was handed to me by a complete stranger. I had tears in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from the realization that something I had hoped for silently, for decades, was now possible. Despite the overwhelming excitement, I forced myself to pause. Acting impulsively could ruin everything. My partner and I agreed to wait 24 hours, allowing time to plan every step carefully. This was not revenge for the sake of anger, it was strategic, precise, and deliberate. We needed to ensure that every action we took would lead to accountability, closure, and justice without crossing ethical or legal boundaries. We arranged a lunch with my father. He had no idea what was coming. When I handed him the photographs, I saw the shock and relief wash over him. The stepmother who had manipulated, isolated, and controlled him for decades was finally revealed. For the first time, he could see the truth, understand what had been happening behind closed doors, and feel the weight lift from his shoulders. His voice trembled as he asked questions, trying to reconcile his past with this newfound clarity. We discussed the next steps carefully. One round of evidence wasn't enough. Legal disputes could arise, denials could be made, and manipulation could be attempted. We needed to document patterns, gather timestamps, and strengthen our case so that the truth would be undeniable. This required patience and meticulous planning. Over the next hours, we devised a strategy: observe, document, and wait. Every detail mattered, every nuance counted. Acting too soon could jeopardize everything. Reflecting on this situation, I felt a surge of empowerment. For years, my father had been powerless, trapped by manipulation. Now, armed with undeniable evidence and a plan, the balance had shifted. This wasn't about humiliation, it was about justice, clarity, and reclaiming what had been lost. The opportunity to right past wrongs was rare, and I intended to use it fully. Every skill I had learned as an investigator, every observation, every careful calculation, would be applied to ensure a precise, effective outcome. The fireman's unexpected involvement had been the catalyst. A stranger had unknowingly handed me the key to long-awaited justice. It was serendipity, but it demanded action. My father and I could not have orchestrated this alone, but now that it had arrived, it was up to us to act with discipline and foresight. The plan would require restraint, patience, and careful timing, but the payoff would be worth every calculated step. By the end of the day, the path forward was clear. We would gather additional evidence, prepare my father for confrontation, and ensure that when the time came, the truth would be undeniable. The stepmother had underestimated us, and that underestimation would become her undoing. This was not vengeance driven by anger, it was a restoration of balance, a reclamation of dignity, and a long-awaited opportunity to right decades of wrongs. The emotional weight of the situation was profound. This was not merely about exposing infidelity, it was about validation, empowerment, and the restoration of relationships that had been fractured by manipulation. For the first time, I felt the possibility of closure, of reclaiming control over a past that had seemed permanently tainted. Every photo, every detail, every careful observation became a tool in a larger plan, a step toward a resolution that would finally deliver the justice I had longed for. I realized then the full significance of patience and strategy. The chance for justice had arrived, and it would require calm, deliberate action to be fully effective. Years of experience, years of observation, and years of suppressed emotion had prepared me for this moment. The coming days would test our precision, resolve, and discipline, but I knew with certainty that the outcome would be worth every calculated effort. This was more than revenge, it was restoration, clarity, and reclamation. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that after years of watching, waiting, and longing, I finally held the means to act. My father would see the truth, my siblings would witness the consequences, and the stepmother would face the reality she had carefully hidden for so long. The stage was set. The opportunity was perfect. And I was ready to move forward with purpose, precision, and unwavering determination. After confirming the initial evidence, we knew one round of proof wouldn't be enough. Legal challenges, denials, and her natural cunning meant that the case had to be airtight. Over the next 3 days, we observed her routine meticulously. Every step, every pattern, every small action became part of a larger picture. She had a predictable schedule, which had gone unnoticed for years. Hours-long bike rides, once dismissed by everyone as harmless, turned out to be the perfect cover for clandestine meetings. We documented times, routes, interactions, and anything that contradicted the story she presented to the family. Each photograph, each note, each detail increased the weight of truth we were building. Patience became our most critical tool. We studied her movements, catalogued anomalies, and analyzed behaviors with precision. On the first day, we watched from a distance as she rode out of the neighborhood, returning hours later. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until small inconsistencies began to appear, slightly different cars parked near her usual routes, brief stops that didn't fit her cycling patterns, subtle signals that suggested she was meeting someone. We captured everything, knowing that a single oversight could weaken the case. On the second day, we observed her repeating the same pattern. The consistency made it easier to document, harder for her to deny, and more damning in potential court proceedings. My father remained informed throughout the process, although he stayed deliberately detached. He needed to process the emotional impact, but he also understood the importance of restraint. Acting prematurely would have reduced our leverage. Each day of observation became a calculated investment, turning small glimpses of infidelity into a comprehensive body of evidence. By the third day, the picture was clear. The routine was undeniable. She was exploiting the trust of everyone around her while maintaining the illusion of innocence. The pattern, combined with the original photos, provided irrefutable proof. We now had a precise understanding of how to time the final action. Preparation was critical. One wrong move could allow her to regain control or manipulate the narrative. Every step had to be deliberate, methodical, and calculated for maximum impact. The next stage involved organizing the physical aspects of the plan. We packed her belongings carefully, creating boxes that included everything she owned in the household. This was not about destruction, it was about removing her hold and signaling the inevitability of accountability. My father participated actively, his presence lending authority and reinforcing the truth of the evidence. Together, we reviewed the final steps, ensuring no detail was overlooked, no opportunity wasted. Timing was everything, and the plan had to align perfectly with her return from a business trip. Throughout this process, I reflected on the years of injustice and the satisfaction that came from finally being able to act. My father had endured manipulation silently for decades, and now the opportunity to restore balance had arrived. The careful collection of evidence was not only strategic but cathartic. Watching her patterns unfold, documenting her deception, and knowing that every moment brought us closer to resolution created a steady, empowering sense of purpose. We discussed the potential challenges we might face. Denials, attempts at manipulation, or emotional outbursts could arise at any moment. Anticipating these behaviors was essential. Our strategy relied on patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. I reminded my father that the goal was not to humiliate but to restore order, clarity, and fairness. The plan required discipline, and any deviation could compromise the entire effort. As the final day approached, we reviewed all collected evidence. Photos, timestamps, observations, and corroborating details formed a clear narrative. Nothing could be misinterpreted or dismissed. Each piece of proof added weight and credibility. The advantage we had gained through careful observation and meticulous documentation ensured that when the moment came, the truth would be undeniable. The stepmother's control, once absolute, was now precarious. I felt a sense of anticipation that was both exhilarating and measured. Years of watching, analyzing, and planning had led to this point. Every choice had been calculated to ensure maximum impact with minimal risk. The evidence was sufficient, the timing was precise, and the moral justification was clear. This was not about impulsive revenge, it was a deliberate correction of past wrongs, a restoration of dignity for my father and our family. Finally, the day arrived to execute the next phase. The house was prepared, evidence organized, and all contingencies accounted for. We waited for her return, the weight of anticipation settling into focus. My father and I were aligned in purpose, calm in execution, and confident in the inevitability of the outcome. Every detail we had documented, every observation we had made, every plan we had rehearsed, would come together seamlessly. The cumulative effort of 3 days of observation and preparation had created an unassailable foundation. The stepmother's pattern of deceit was no longer hidden. Her manipulations, once subtle and difficult to prove, were now thoroughly documented. The plan was no longer theoretical, it was actionable, practical, and unavoidable. We had transformed years of frustration and suppressed anger into a precise, controlled course of action that would deliver justice without excess or error. As I reflected on the process, I realized the power of patience and strategy. Unlike impulsive retaliation, this approach ensured that consequences were direct, deliberate, and morally defensible. Every photograph, every observation, and every careful note contributed to a larger narrative that would leave no room for doubt or manipulation. The stepmother, who had relied on deception for so long, was about to confront an undeniable reality. Preparation, observation, and strategy had combined to create a situation where justice was inevitable. This phase of planning was as important as the execution itself. Knowing the pattern, gathering the proof, and anticipating responses had strengthened not only the evidence but also our resolve. The opportunity to restore balance, reclaim dignity, and correct past wrongs had been prepared with deliberate care, ensuring the outcome would be comprehensive and effective. Every moment of the past days had reinforced the certainty of success. We had acted with patience, precision, and insight, leveraging the knowledge we had gained through careful observation and analysis. The stepmother's control was over, her deception fully exposed, and the next steps would secure accountability, closure, and justice. There was no room for error, no space for doubt, only the inevitable realization of truth. As the day of action approached, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Years of suppressed emotion, frustration, and longing for fairness had been channeled into a calculated, deliberate effort. The strategy we had developed ensured that the truth would prevail, justice would be delivered, and the family could begin to heal. The meticulous observation, careful documentation, and strategic patience had transformed a situation of long-standing injustice into one where accountability could no longer be avoided. The day of confrontation finally arrived. After days of meticulous observation and careful planning, everything was in place. Her return from a business trip marked the moment we had prepared for. The house was ready, her belongings packed, and every piece of evidence organized. My father and I waited calmly, fully aware that the culmination of our efforts would leave no room for denial or manipulation. As soon as she walked in, a flicker of unease passed across her face. The envelope in my father's hand, my steady expression, and the organized boxes signaled that this was not an ordinary homecoming. Her confusion quickly gave way to panic, then to rage. She screamed, demanding explanations, lashing out in disbelief, trying to assert control in a situation she could no longer manipulate. Years of deception had built her confidence, but the carefully collected evidence stripped her of every advantage. I interrupted her with calm precision, easily and happily. The words landed like a verdict. There was no room for argument, no space for manipulation. The proof we had gathered over days, photos, timestamps, and observed patterns, spoke louder than any scream she could produce. In an instant, she realized that her authority was gone, and the control she had wielded over the household for years had evaporated. She attempted to protest, to rationalize, to deny, but nothing could undo the clarity of the evidence. Her previous confidence crumbled under the weight of truth. Every detail had been anticipated. Every possible argument accounted for. Her power, once absolute, was reduced to impotent frustration. The strategic patience, careful documentation, and planning we had invested ensured that her defenses were useless. The consequences were immediate. She surrendered the house and custody of the children. Her freedom remained intact, but her influence was gone. The children, who had been subtly aware of the dysfunction for years, recognized the truth and distanced themselves. My father regained his authority, his dignity restored, and a renewed bond formed with his children. The family's emotional imbalance, long dominated by fear and manipulation, finally shifted toward equilibrium. The process was satisfying, but not in a way fueled by malice. This was precise, deliberate justice, executed with calm confidence. Years of manipulation and deception culminated in a controlled resolution. Every photograph, observation, and piece of evidence had contributed to the inevitability of this moment. The impact was undeniable, immediate, and morally justified. As her initial shock faded, she moved from anger to reluctant acceptance. The screaming diminished, replaced by disbelief and a realization that her influence was permanently diminished. Her presence would no longer dominate the household. The children, aware of the truth, would no longer be swayed by her manipulations. My father, now free from her control, stood with a renewed sense of empowerment. Watching this unfold, I understood the power of deliberate, calculated action. The satisfaction came from restoring balance and dignity, not from humiliation. My father, who had endured years of silent suffering, could finally experience relief and validation. The children, previously influenced by subtle manipulations, were now able to perceive their father and household clearly, unclouded by deceit. The precision of our strategy left no room for error. Every potential objection, every denial, and every attempt at manipulation had been anticipated and neutralized. This was not impulsive revenge, it was calculated restoration. The results were immediate and undeniable, delivering clarity, accountability, and fairness. The household, once ruled by fear and deceit, was now governed by truth and restored moral balance. Reflecting on the magnitude of the moment, I appreciated the effectiveness of strategy and patience. Impulsive actions could never have produced such a comprehensive, controlled outcome. The careful documentation and timing ensured that the consequences were both fair and complete. The stepmother's power, once unchallenged, had been neutralized, and the family could now operate on a foundation of honesty and accountability. As the initial confrontation settled into quiet, clarity prevailed. My father, previously passive and resigned, now exuded confidence. The children, once uncertain and influenced by manipulation, experienced stability and recognition of the truth. I felt the personal satisfaction of seeing justice executed precisely, effectively, and ethically. The stepmother, stripped of power, could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or control. Her attempts at authority had been anticipated and countered at every stage. The evidence and strategic timing ensured that resistance was futile. The children's awareness of the truth guaranteed her influence would remain limited. My father's restored dignity and the documented proof created a new household equilibrium based on accountability and fairness. This moment was about more than exposing infidelity, it was about restoring trust, authority, and emotional balance. Every action had been deliberate, each observation purposeful. The culmination of planning delivered consequences that were thorough and just. The family, once subject to manipulation, regained stability and clarity. As the household settled into the aftermath, I reflected on the process. Years of manipulation, secrecy, and frustration had been resolved fully. The children were secure, my father's authority restored, and the stepmother faced the reality of her actions without recourse. The combination of careful observation, documentation, and strategic timing ensured a result that was decisive and enduring. Every detail of the plan had contributed to the outcome. Surveillance, evidence collection, and precise execution transformed years of frustration into controlled resolution. The stepmother's deceit was exposed, her influence eliminated, and the family's equilibrium restored. Emotional satisfaction was grounded in justice and moral clarity, not malice. Finally, a calm settled over the household. My father, once passive and constrained, now held authority and confidence. The children, once uncertain, were now able to navigate their family relationships clearly. And I, having guided this process with patience, strategy, and moral focus, experienced the profound closure that comes from watching truth and justice prevail. The stepmother's reaction, from panic to resignation, marked the full reversal of her control. She was free in movement but confined by the consequences of her choices. The family, however, had reclaimed balance, dignity, and emotional clarity. The carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded, her deceit was exposed, accountability established, and fairness restored. This was the ultimate proof of the power of patience, strategy, and ethical focus. Impulsive action could never have achieved the same comprehensive, controlled, and morally sound result. The family's restored equilibrium, the children's understanding of truth, and my father's renewed authority were testaments to the effectiveness of deliberate, calculated action. Years of suppressed frustration, careful observation, and precise planning had culminated in a decisive outcome. The stepmother's influence was nullified, her manipulation exposed, and the family's emotional and moral balance restored. The result was clear, undeniable, and thoroughly satisfying. After the confrontation, the household began to settle into a new rhythm. The stepmother's presence was no longer a source of fear or manipulation. Her control had evaporated, leaving space for truth, accountability, and genuine family connection. The children, previously wary and confused, started to engage with their father openly. The balance that had been disrupted for years was slowly being restored. My father, once passive and constrained, reclaimed his authority. He now made decisions without the weight of manipulation pressing on every action. The relief on his face was palpable, decades of frustration, guilt, and suppressed anger had finally found resolution. For him, the process wasn't just about exposing the stepmother's infidelity, it was about reclaiming his life, dignity, and role as a father. The stepmother retreated, realizing that her power had vanished. Her influence over the children, household, and even my father was permanently diminished. Her attempts to assert control became irrelevant. The evidence we had gathered, combined with the timing of our action, ensured that she could not manipulate the narrative or regain authority. Her freedom remained, but it was hollow, devoid of influence or respect. In the days that followed, I reflected on the significance of patience and strategy. The careful observation, documentation, and execution had been critical. Acting impulsively could have led to chaos or legal complications. By moving deliberately, we ensured the outcome was decisive, undeniable, and ethically sound. Justice was delivered not through anger or humiliation, but through calculated, precise action. The children, once subtly influenced by deceit, now experienced clarity. They saw their father as he truly was, empowered, honest, and capable of guiding the family. The stepmother's manipulation no longer clouded their perception. For them, the lessons were profound: deception has consequences, and truth ultimately prevails. Emotional stability returned, and the family dynamic shifted toward genuine connection and understanding. Our plan had been carefully orchestrated to achieve these results. Every detail, from surveillance to evidence collection, had been designed to ensure accountability. The stepmother's deceit was exposed publicly within the household, leaving no space for manipulation or denial. My father's dignity and authority were restored, the children's understanding clarified, and the family's balance repaired. There was also a personal satisfaction in witnessing the long-term effects. Years of resentment, frustration, and suppressed anger had been channeled into a controlled, ethical resolution. The stepmother's exposure was complete, leaving her powerless, while the family reclaimed stability. The process demonstrated the power of careful planning, patience, and precision in achieving justice without unnecessary conflict. In the aftermath, the household adjusted to its new reality. The stepmother's absence of authority allowed the family to function with honesty and clarity. My father engaged with the children without fear or hesitation, rebuilding trust and connection. The children, freed from subtle manipulation, began to understand the dynamics that had influenced them for years. The equilibrium, once disrupted by deceit, was now restored. For me, the outcome reinforced a vital truth: true justice is deliberate. Impulsive revenge may feel satisfying temporarily, but lasting resolution comes from patience, strategy, and ethical precision. By carefully observing, documenting, and timing our actions, we ensured that the consequences were fair, complete, and enduring. The stepmother's deceit was neutralized, my father's authority restored, and the family could finally operate on a foundation of truth. Looking back, I realized the significance of every step we had taken. The initial evidence, the careful surveillance, the strategic confrontation, all of it contributed to a decisive outcome. The family, once fractured by manipulation and deceit, now moved forward with clarity, balance, and restored trust. The process had been challenging, but the results were undeniable: justice had been served, and the family's dignity reclaimed. Ultimately, the experience demonstrated that calculated action, patience, and moral focus are the most effective tools in achieving lasting justice. The stepmother, once dominant, had no recourse. The children and my father now experienced clarity and stability. And I had fulfilled a long-standing desire to restore fairness and balance to a life disrupted by deceit. The household, once defined by fear and manipulation, was now grounded in truth, accountability, and restored relationships. If you loved this story of cunning, justice, and family triumph, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more gripping tales of revenge, secrets, and dramatic twists that keep you on the edge. Share your thoughts in the comments below.